Good morning. My biggest fear today is that I do not have a joke that's going to make Angelina Horse laugh. I focus too much on the important stuff, and I missed that. So. We're still going to try, but... All right, guys, if you will, turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 15. You'll see this week, technology will not whip me, because I left it all behind. I'm using the good old-fashioned black and white leather-bound version. I'm tired of fighting technology, so at times if I start jumping around, I might have to pause while I flip pages too. So as you're turning, I'm going to take time to do something that I usually don't have to do, but I'm going to give credit to the inspiration for this message. There's no way I can say this without sounding really dumb, but I don't read a whole lot. A man once told me, he said, a man who does not read is not much better than a man who cannot read. I was like, well, yeah, I guess that's true. But I have been forced to start reading more since I started taking some classes. And one of the books I read is called Becoming a Contagious Christian. It is written by Bill Hybels and Mark Middleburg. And I guess I should have been smart and told you how long ago they wrote this book. I feel like, let's see, copyright says 1996, and then it looks like maybe revised in 2004, something like that. So it's not a new book on the shelf, but it's a great book. I don't often endorse books, but I fully endorse this one because I'm going to preach from it. I'm going to preach from it because our district office endorsed it and made me read it. Pastor set this thing up really well last week. He didn't know where I was headed. I didn't know where he was headed. But I could not resist. When I read this book about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, I thought, Lord, I'd really like to preach these concepts because they are revolutionary to a guy like me. The title of the class that went with that book was Evangelism in the Church. And so as you can imagine what this book, Contagious Christianity, or Becoming a Contagious Christian, the purpose of the book is to inspire and to provide some techniques for us in the church to pursue evangelism. And one of the things that was really impressed early in the book was why. Why do we do evangelism? Why should we do evangelism? And as Pastor set the tone for 2018 last week with Forward and Harvest, and as he began to talk about the compassion that we should have, I thought, Lord, I didn't realize I was going to get to do this soon after having had this course. But you know, the Lord is smart, and he knows that I forget things, so it probably was better that I do this sooner rather than later, right? Somebody laughed. Y'all forgive me, I'll tell you another thing I messed up, because I love telling y'all what I mess up. I put my text in my notes before my introduction, and I should have done my introduction first. But anyways, so as Pastor set the tone last week, I'm going to ask if you all had the same reaction that I did. Now, this is a rhetorical question. I don't expect you to say yes or no. I mean, if you want to, it's a Pentecostal church. We're not silent. But I'm going to ask you to think, when he said, what if we all won one more person to the Lord? Or if each one of us were to win one more, there'd be twice as many of us here this time next year. And as he made that say, he also said that what he would like for us to do is that we would all pray that God would make that opportunity for us to reach one more person. And if you're anything like me, you felt two emotions. Wow, that'd be really cool if I got to lead one person to the Lord. And then right behind that, you went, how would I do that? So it was like this excitement, terror, you know, that's That's how most of the church sees evangelism. In fact, our district superintendent, Victor Smith, whenever he opened the course, he said, you know, many Christians believe that evangelism is the prison sentence that's the exchange for the gift of salvation. That because I have been given grace, the bad side of that is I now have to evangelize for the rest of my life, you know. Because we're so intimidated by this concept of sharing our faith. And I believe that part of the reason that we're so intimidated by it is because perhaps we have a skewed view of how evangelism looks. So for many of us, we're intimidated by it. We're daunted by it. We don't want anything to do with it. We say, Lord, that's not the gift you gave me. I'm not going to evangelize. But so that you guys don't accuse me of trying to sneak around you, I'm going to tell you the point. The point is that we should all, every one of us, we have evangelism work to do. It's not a pastor's job. It's not the missions director's job. It's not the worship leader's job. It's not the evangelism pastor's job. Evangelism is a part of every believer's life. So I'm telling you the end at the beginning. We'll come back around to that, okay? So we have a view of evangelism. I think most of us, when I say the word evangelism, you're probably going to envision one of these scenarios. One, going door to door knocking. Can we tell you about Jesus? Where do you go to church? You looking for a church home? That's one of our standard evangelism images. The other one is carrying around a trunk full of tracts. I'm just curious how outdated our terminology is. Please don't be embarrassed. Nobody's going to think ill of you. Can I ask you to raise your hand if you don't know what a tract is? There's nothing wrong with not knowing what a tract is. There's absolutely nothing wrong with not knowing what it is. Okay, everybody in here knows. So when I use the word tract, you're all with me, right? Little booklet, tells a story. Okay. So our view of evangelism, one of our views of evangelism is standing in the food court trying to hand a tract out to everybody who walks by, right? Or carrying a bunch of them in your trunk and leaving them in the bathroom at McDonald's, right? You know, that's evangelism. The last one, and I couldn't help but think of anyone other than Ken Harrell because he and I have talked about this one before. But maybe the most intimidating and dreadful form of evangelism that most of us are so afraid of is street corner preaching, right? So the guy standing on the street corner with the megaphone, you're all going to hell. Repent, you know. See, I think many of us in the church, when somebody starts talking about evangelism, we immediately go to Instagram on our phone. We go to Facebook. We say, oh, this is not for me, Lord. Please help them hear this. Or we just immediately tune out. Or we get terrified and go, oh, let me start thinking of my excuses now why I'm not the one to do evangelism. Okay? And I think it's because those are the images that we have of what evangelism is. And now, don't get me wrong, I'm not here today to throw stones at any of those methods. I'm not here today to say that those are invalid or should be retired. I'm not saying that at all. I'm here to acknowledge that the majority of us sitting in this room, myself included, are not comfortable in that situation. And there's a reason we're not comfortable in that situation. And it's not that you're broken. It's not that there's anything wrong with you. Let me tell you, I might do okay up here, but I am not a street corner preacher. Now, if the Lord, poked me in the back and asked me to do it, and I was sure he asked me, I'd do it out of obedience, but it is not my forte. It is not. Ken Harrell, he is a street corner preacher. You drop him on any street corner in the world, and he'd start preaching. He can do it in 2 languages. That's just his thing. That's his gift. He loves to do it. I have been with him. We said, hey, do you know one where I can go to? And I said, but what I hope to do today is to take those 3 images and any other image you might have in your mind that's like that, that's intimidating, that is frightful when it comes to evangelism. And let's start with a clean slate. Okay, so at the risk, it's like 11:35. You're getting tired and hungry, I know, but we've had an exciting service so far, so you should be good. I'm going to ask y'all to close your eyes. We ain't going to do this long, okay? So close your eyes. I'm going to close mine too. And envision in front of you a whiteboard. And on that whiteboard are the images of these different kinds of evangelism that you tend to think of. So when I say the word evangelism, those images are up there. Now, pastor's really smart, so he's probably got the right, so pastor just doesn't apply to you. But we take the other ones, all the rest of us who have got a flawed sense of what evangelism is. And now let's erase it. They're all gone. Okay, now open your eyes before you go to sleep. And now what I want to do today is, I'm going to introduce, now this is the first of a series. Today we're going to introduce the concept of evangelism. Today we're going to talk about why evangelism. Today we're going to talk about, okay, how is that important? In the weeks after this, we're going to talk about some of the hows, some of the how-tos. Because it's one thing to say, we need to do it. It's another thing to say, this is how we do it, okay? I started off with this book because it inspired this, but I'm also going to give them a cheap plug. It's a relatively cheap book. Get a hold to it, okay? ChristianBookstore.com is a good place to get it. Amazon probably has it even cheaper because they got everything cheaper. But get a hold of that book. It's crazy. It's awesome. From a guy who don't like to read, I'm telling you, it's a great book. What I want to do today is we're going to wipe that away and we're going to start talking about evangelism. So if we're going to talk about evangelism, if we're going to talk about, the first thing that we need to understand is we need to ask the question, or we need to settle the question. As people who are following the Lord, as people who serve God, as people who have been redeemed, do you think lost or wandering souls matter to the Lord? Duh, right? I mean, that's an easy question to answer. Of course the lost matter to the Lord. Let's go to our text to make sure that we have a biblical understanding, right? So in Luke chapter 15, verse 1, I should read the entire chapter to you, but we don't have that kind of time, so I'm going to read the first 7 verses, and then I'm going to probably reference things that are in verses 8 through 32, and I'm going to ask you to go back and read those later, but let's start with verse 1. It says, now the tax collectors, it's that time of year, right? Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country to go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep. I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Our first thing we need to understand today is that the lost do matter to God. We can't say that enough. We can't remind ourselves enough. I was thinking that you guys know I'm an analyst by trade, and so I do ratios and percentages, and I was thinking over this morning as I was getting ready, and I thought, there is more rejoicing over one lost person than 99 righteous people who got it together. So that is a 1 to 99 ratio of ability to create joy. So as to say, if there were 100 people sitting here today and only one of them was lost, there would be more happiness over that one who found Jesus than the 99 who had already found him. Let that sink in. In case you wonder where, if God's got a priority list, right? Those of us who have been redeemed, we might be outranked. That's revolutionary, isn't it? Inside these 4 walls, we tend to think that we're his favorites. But the ones that really burden his heart, the ones who he will leave us for and go out and chase and go out and find, are the ones who a lot of times we might look at as adversaries. We might look at as enemies because they don't believe what we believe. I like what he does here when Jesus tells his first parable, when he chooses to use the illustration of sheep and shepherds. You know, Jesus, he was a real good teacher. His illustrations were perfect. And so whenever he talks about that one sheep, that's lost. He didn't have to use a lot of words to say a lot. Because when he talked about that one sheep that's out there lost, this is what we can deduce from merely understanding it's a lost sheep. We can see, one, that sheep, that lamb, was outside of the service of the shepherd. So that lamb's job was to serve the shepherd, right? I mean, now granted, the shepherd takes care of, the shepherd protects, but that sheep represented a piece of income. That sheep had a purpose to fulfill for that shepherd. And that shepherd had lost that asset. That shepherd had lost that thing that was to serve a purpose. Furthermore, we see that if the sheep was outside of the fold, that lamb was missing from communion with its body, with its brothers and sisters. It was alone. It was not in this place where it had those who were its family to look out for it. It was outside of this place where it had the joy and the camaraderie of people, or sheep, who loved it, who cared for it, who were a part of its own DNA in a lot of cases, right? So then lastly, as that sheep is outside the fold, that sheep is outside of its layer of protection from predators, from thieves, from treacherous terrain, briars and thickets, or it had no one to look out to make sure that it had water, that it could be nourished, or food, or green pastures where it could grow and develop and be strong. So when Jesus chose to talk about those who are not saved, those who were outside of the religious community, when he chose to talk about them as sheep outside the fold, we hear the compassion in how he looks at a sheep. He doesn't look at that sheep that's wandering as a rebellious brat. He doesn't look at that sheep that's wandering as someone who's doing damage to the rest of the flock. He looks at that sheep that's wandering as one without a shepherd. He looks at that sheep that's wandering as one who has no one to make sure that it's going to have good water and good food, to make sure that it's going to be safe, to make sure that nothing's going to kill it or hurt it. When in that simple statement, when Jesus begins this parable around the whole idea that a lost sheep, he's telegraphing to us his viewpoint, how he sees those who are lost. The other thing, as we go through, like I mentioned, that the sheep represented an income source for the shepherd. The sheep represented something that served a purpose. So he also tells us that the sheep is valuable. So if the sheep is an example or a type or a image of the lost and wandering soul, then what we can also see is that that sheep has value, as does the lost, the wanderer, the seeker, whatever you choose to call those who have not been reconciled to Christ. They have value. They're not useless. They're not problems. They're not the enemy. They are those who the Lord is interested in and sees value in. They matter to him. The parables behind this, so starting in verse 8 and then starting in verse 11, we're all very familiar with the one that starts in verse 11. It's often called the prodigal son. But in the parable of the lost coin, again, he talks about a woman who has 10 coins and she's lost one of them. And in the day's times, it's estimated that one coin would have been worth a day's wages. So he does that to illustrate that coin was valuable. It goes without saying that the son in the last parable was valuable. So when we ask the question about evangelism, we have to understand that the lost matter to God. This mic's in a little bit different place than it normally is, and my cup's a little bit bigger than it normally is too. Sidebar, I did turn the Gamecock label this way so as not to offend some of you. Point number one today, and this is what I really want you to get, is the lost matter to God. Remember, this whole exchange begins because you had the righteous, you know, the ones who have it together, right? You had them complaining because Jesus is welcoming sinners and he's eating with them. And then Jesus does something here that we haven't seen him do in a lot of places. Usually he'll tell a parable and he'll kind of pause for clarification. And then if something needs to be clarified, and then he might go a little bit different angle. And then if they're still kind of not getting it, he'll go another angle. But what we'll see that he does here, man, I'm getting a little bit warm up here. But what we see that he does here is he actually tells 3 parables in rapid succession. So he doesn't really even take a breath in between them. So what I'm going to point out is in verse 3, he says, then he just told this parable, starting in verse 4, suppose one of you, and then he goes to that parable. Then in verse 8, he turns around. He said, this woman has 10 silver coins. So he started off there with, or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins. And then at the end of that, get down to verse 11, he says, and Jesus continued. So what we see here is that Jesus has these Pharisees kind of on the ropes, and he's saying, look here, boom, boom, boom. I'm telling you 3 stories about value, about the lost, and I want you to understand that they matter. They matter to me. You ain't get around this. They matter to me, okay? So when you go through and see the way this scripture is structured, I want you to grab a hold of that Jesus is doing something here he doesn't do very often. He isn't even giving these guys a chance to pause and think about it. He's saying, let me drive home a definitive point. In case you're wondering, Pharisees, they matter to me, which brings us to point 2. They better matter to you. If the lost matter to Jesus, then you bet they better matter to the church. In Matthew 28:19, we use this all the time. We begin to talk about how the Great Commission tells us that we're supposed to go out into all nations, preach the gospel and disciple, create new believers, all that good stuff, right? And we so often think of that as just a missions kind of verse, but really it applies to all of us, right? It applies to every one of us. That was the Great Commission. Why would you call it the Great Commission if it wasn't commissioning something great, right? I mean, I tell people all the time, the Bible was written so that less intelligent people can understand it too. Since I got kids, I had to start phrasing things differently. As you know me a long time now, I used to say that phrase differently, but I used to use words that we don't teach our kids anymore. God loves the unintelligent. So the Great Commission, y'all got that? Okay. So don't overcomplicate. The Great Commission, we're being commissioned to do something great. This is Jesus' last directive. You got to believe it's kind of important, right? You know, right before you get ready to leave on a trip and you say something like, make sure you turn the water off, you mean it. Or make sure you lock the door, that's the most important thing. So make sure you go tell other people about what's going on here, you know. So he's telling his disciples this at Matthew 28. And so I think that we can deduce from that with pretty good certainty that the church's job is the Great Commission. Not just to tell people about Jesus, but also to disciple them. You guys ought to be feeling good. I'm 2 pages in. We're trucking. We're doing all right. I have plenty of time to mess it up. The other thing we want to go back and highlight here, so underneath this idea that the lost had better matter to us, they should matter to us because we belong to the Father. We are His. We should do what our Father wants us to do. And if the lost matter to Him, we had better be getting our ideas, our ideologies, our evaluations in line with His. And if they matter to Him, if they're valuable to Him, and if they don't matter to you, and if they're not valuable to you, then you're the one with the problem, not God. I know that sounds kind of harsh, but this is something where we in the church cannot mess up. We have no wiggle room here. We got to get this right. As a means of the Great Commission, we have understanding that we are supposed to be about this business. Through these parables, in all three parables, when the lost coin, the lost lamb, the lost son, when they are restored, there is great joy and celebration. Jesus, by way of these parables, ordains that the expectation is that when a lost person comes home, this is a reason to celebrate. This is a reason to get excited. So if this is a reason to get excited, why should it not matter to us, right? It sounds like if we want to talk about the things that get Jesus excited, we now know that if we want to get him excited, we need to make sure that lost people are getting restored. As we also understand that the lost had better matter to us, I'm going to read you guys a part of this story that is hard for me. It's hard for me to read because, I like to be transparent with you guys. This is not the place where I have always excelled, and from time to time I still do not. But in Luke 15, verse 28, this is after the son has come home. It says, the older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fatted calf for him. And the father says, my son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. When we talk about the lost mattering to God and that they better matter to us, we had better understand that some of the most dangerous places we can be is as this older brother. And let's all be transparent, right? I'm not going to ask you for a show of hands. I'll be transparent for all of us. You ever seen that lost person come home and you're just ready to heap condemnation on them? You're so glad that they're groveling before the Lord, but it ain't because they're being restored. It's because, I told you was a sinner. I'm just being honest. There ain't no Jesus in that. Jesus is teaching us in this parable what the correct attitude ought to be. I remember when they dug Saddam Hussein up out of that spider hole in Iraq. And I remember how we all celebrated, and I remember how so many people, I was born in 85, and so he was around for a lot of those formidable years of my childhood learning about war. He was my generation's great villain. And I remember thinking, and I said this probably a number of times, not that my heart was really in the right place, but just thinking, hypothesizing, what if Saddam Hussein made it to heaven? What if we learned that at some point between when they found him and when he was executed, what if we found out that he gave his heart to the Lord? What if we found, would we really rejoice? Or would we sit back and call bull? We say, there's no way. There's no way he might have said the words, but he didn't mean it. Would we say, I ain't going to heaven with him? If he's in heaven, I ain't going. I know that sounds really crazy, but there's some people who like that. What I could really do if we really want to put a mirror up in front of ourselves is the person who you think is the most unsavable person who has offended you the most. What if they made it? Would you really be cool with it? Or would you be more astounded that they made it than grateful that they made it? Remember, the father here in this parable is telling us, look, you got to see it through the right lens. You got to see it the right way. Your brother was dead. I don't care what he was doing. All that matters, it doesn't matter, you pile up whatever list of sins he was doing that you want to, all that really matters to me is that he was dead. He was gone. And I've got my boy back. That's all that matters. I don't care what bags he brought back with him. I don't care what junk he brought back home. The point is that he is now back home in my house. That's how the lost matter to the Lord. That's how they better matter to us. So hopefully, and what I've been praying about is that through this introduction to this series, that the Lord would begin to transform how we see the world outside the church. Because my fear, and I believe, Pastor said this last week, that one of the things that the church lacks the most is compassion. Compassion for the lost. Compassion for our Father's work. One of the things that we were taught in class, and one of the things that you'll see in this book, the lifeblood of a church is a new convert. The lifeblood, where the vitality of the church comes in that work where those who are lost are found. And I don't believe it was by chance that the Lord was directing Pastor to set the tone for 2018, that we're going to be about harvest. We're going to be about getting folk restored to where the Lord wants them, bringing them back home. That's what we're going to be about in 2018. Now, this church has done Halloween and we've done Vacation Bible School, and I'm not saying either one of those are bad examples. Like, those are great. But let me go one step further and say, we can't be content that the evangelism outreach of this church are two events where we ask people to come here. You hearing what I'm saying? We can't be satisfied that that is our evangelism. We can't wear those badges and go, yeah, we do evangelism. Man, you seen Halloween? It's awesome. They wanted to write it up in the Pentecostal Evangel. We can't be content that that's our church's ministry. You know what I mean? Where we have to, if we want a vibrant church, if we want that excitement, if we want the presence of the Lord, if we want to be doing those things, each one of us have to be out recruiting. And I'm not talking about just inviting people to church. That's not what I'm talking about. You see, as we go over the coming weeks, I'm going to teach you guys a formula. Call it Formula for Success. It ain't my formula. I got it from the book, so don't give me no credit. It just rocked my world when I read it. I was like, oh, dog. It's pretty good. If the lost matter to God and they had better matter to us, then we're going to use this formula for success to make it work here. The formula is, there you go, HP plus CP plus CC equals MI. For all of you who hated chemistry, I know you're saying bad things about me, because this looks very much like a chemical equation. It might be, but anyways, the HP stands for high potency. The CP stands for, you might want to write this down. I should have told you that before I told you, so let me pause. I'll say it again. You got your pen, sketch paper? Okay. If not, it'll be online later. Go back and scribble it down. But this is going to keep coming up. This is going to be the basis of the rest of this, is this formula. HP stands for high potency. CP stands for close proximity. CC stands for clear communication. MI stands for maximum impact. So when you talk about how you want to have a vibrant, healthy church, think about your families, especially I'll speak to the Steele family here. Actually, there's been a bunch of y'all done had babies lately. The Browns, think about y'all too. The Barnes, they done had some youngins. Some of y'all getting ready to have some fun. I ain't seen Rihanna, there she is. I know in my family, because my sister likes to have a heap of youngins. She'll jab me for this one later. She listens to the podcast. She got 5 of them. Lord help her. Think about when that new life comes into the family. Oh, yeah, Belinda. Yeah, that's right. Think about when that new life comes into the family. Think about how excited everyone gets. Think about how we all have these hopes and these dreams, and we all start feeling these warm fuzzies that we usually don't feel, and it's like, oh man, it's just wonderful. There's this new life. It represents a continuation of the generation. It represents that everything that we've created this far is going to continue. It's new life. It's new blood. It's new into our family. That model applies in the church too. I mean, you let somebody get radically saved up in here, there's going to be some excitement. And let's just be honest, the challenge is going to be for us not to be wet blankets to slow them down. You know what I'm saying? You start getting 3 or 4 people every Sunday up here meeting Jesus for the first time. Let me tell you, you ain't going to recognize this place. I believe, I told Pastor, when I started studying this in class, I was like, Lord, this is awesome. To think about evangelism in this way. To think about the effects of it in this way. And what I hope we can accomplish over the coming weeks is to develop not only a skill set, because there's some work to it, but not only a skill set, but a hunger that we will begin to see the world the way God sees it. That we will hurt for his lost kids too. And it won't be during 2 months of the year in September and October, and it won't be for a month out of the year in June. That we will live day in and day out with the expectation that we are going to be his agents of restoration. That he is going to use us to, as Pastor Paul says, to arrange meetings between orphans and their father. That we're going to be the world's most fun adoption agents. It's going to be great. So as we bring this to a close, I'm going to tell one story. It's going to get me in trouble. I like being in trouble. Somebody at my wife's office, she was telling a story on me. I said, he actually said that? She laughed and said, yeah. And I said, does your husband love the doghouse? She said, my husband don't know what a house other than a doghouse is. But my wife is gracious, and she pretty much lives in the doghouse with me, just not because of her, but because she likes to be next to me. As we bring this round to a close, what I want us to walk out of here with today is an understanding that evangelism is our job. You know, I said earlier that it's not pastor's job, but pastor's a believer. So it's a part of his believing relationship to evangelize, and he does. Just like, you know, Victor Smith, our district superintendent, he has become the Miyabi Japanese steakhouse evangelist. If you're ever around him, ask him about it. He's got great stories to tell about what the Lord does around a, table. But I want you to think about, and if you're in a multi-level marketing company, please do not be offended at me. I'm not poking fun at you. But I want you all to think about your favorite or not so favorite Advocare rep, or Young Living, or doTERRA voodoo oil selling friend. Or I wrote a bunch of these down, but now I'm having a hard time remembering them all because there's so many. Monet shampoo. I got a friend that's doing that one. Rodent and Fields, I don't even know what they sell, but I think about rats every time because I think like rodent. But anyways, think about that person. We all know one, right? There's one in my feed that, man. But the one that you know that is always pushing, that is always selling, I'm going to tell you something that you may not understand about them. They're really not doing you that way to try and get rich. They're really not. They legitimately believe that their product really will make your life better. Hear that. They legitimately believe that. And I'm not saying it won't. I'm not throwing stones at any of y'all's products. if the lost matter to God, if they had better matter to us, and if we've been given a formula to be successful at recruiting, or we'll say restoring, then we should be like them people. Now, I'm not saying blast everybody on Facebook. I'm not saying that all their methodologies are the best marketing tools. But if we really believe that our product, I have a degree in marketing, so forgive me for calling that a product, but if we really believe that our product is really as awesome as what we say it is, that it will save your life for eternity, that it will restore you, that it will deliver you, that it will heal you, that it will give you peace that passes on. If we really believe this, perhaps we should be a little more intentional about trying to get other people exposed to this product too. And that's what evangelism really is. Evangelism is a big religious word for telling other people about the answers that are in this book. It doesn't have to be preaching. It doesn't have to be through a track. As I was preparing for this, I thought about some of the best evangelism I've ever done. One of them was on a sidewalk outside of a library. One of them was in a cold office in a warehouse. After a lot of relationship building, one of them I was reminded just this past week, a guy, he told me, he said, "You do understand what happened, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I mean, I know." And he said, No. I didn't get called to a deeper walk with the Lord. I got saved. Let me tell you something. Over 10 years later, that still shot a little bit of energy through me. As I was praying even this morning, I said, "Lord, get me back to where I was when I ministered to this one and when I ministered to that one," because those were exciting days. If your Christian walk is a little bit dull, let us get back to evangelism. Because there ain't nothing more exciting than seeing somebody radically restored. Than seeing what the power, the transforming power of Jesus Christ can do in a person's life. I love that Matt's having an awesome recovery. I love that. That's a great miracle. But it is still less than a salvation. You get that? The greatest miracle God ever does is restoring a man's heart. That's the greatest miracle you'll ever witness. And when you get to see it firsthand, and when God's gracious enough to allow you to be a part of it, man, there is nothing that feels that good. So as we get ready to move into communion, I'm going to turn things back over to Pastor. But as I leave you with, start rolling around in your head. If I'm going to pray this prayer that Pastor asked me to pray, that God would provide for me an opportunity to win one soul to Him, what can I do to begin preparing? Am I ready? You'll probably feel like you're not, because I know I feel like I'm not. Are you willing? Is the real question you need to ask. And if you're not willing, pray for a willing heart. Because if you want to get your walk ignited, if you want to get your walk jacked up, we got to get busy about evangelism. I think that 2018 has the potential, if we will follow where Pastor has set the tone for us to go, if we will do that, then folks, it's going to be a wild and crazy ride, and you ain't seen the half of the excitement that's coming our way.